So the annual NESG Economic Summit has come around once again, and the focus is on getting rid of the bottlenecks that continue to choke Nigeria's economy, forcing it to splutter and nosedive. Things like corruption that undermine public trust and investor confidence. But then there's also the lack of investment in human capital and the ineffectiveness of this country's institutions, as well as overall a rather inefficient domestic economy. All of the things that are supposed to drive socio-economic growth. Add to this the spectacular collapse of the naira, rising inflation, poverty, unemployment, and of course the failure of governance, and you have to wonder why the economy hasn't imploded. So is there a fundamental way to right Nigeria's economy? Does it go beyond mere economics, and can Nigerian politicians fix it?
The 5 sub-themes: stimulating economic growth, mobilizing finance for sustainable economic development, harnessing human capital, reforming public institutions, and promoting national cohesion and inclusion are consistent with my administration's Renew Hope agenda. And we are confident that this summit will serve as a platform for translating our strategic vision into action and result with collaboration with you. After a decade dominated by 2 economic recessions and a global pandemic, we find ourselves coming into a federal administration at a time that is laden with even more challenging socio-economic conditions than was the case in 1993, the year of the very first Nigerian Economic Summit. Combined global economic growth is projected not only to stagnate but slide into a reverse trajectory over the next fiscal year from 3.5 million % growth recorded in 2022 down to 3.0 in 2023 and 2024.
President Tinubu. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the former Deputy Governor of Nigeria's Central Bank, Professor Kingsley Moghalu, who is currently CEO of Sogato Strategies LLC, a Washington-based macroeconomic and geopolitical risk consultancy that advises global investors. Professor Moghalu is also president of the Institute for Governance and Economic Transformation, a public policy think tank. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Nice to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Everyone knows the threats this country is facing from an economy that is flatlining, even as it becomes obvious that Nigeria is broke. What's the problem? I mean, I'm going to put it just starkly. What's the problem with Nigeria's economy, and what's the best way to fix it?
The problem with Nigeria's economy is that we do not understand how to fix it, and we have made some very important mistakes. See, any prosperous economy operates at 4 levels. The first level is the philosophical level. That is to say, what is the organizing vision and philosophy of any country? And from there, what is the economic philosophy that drives the country's economy? The second level is the level of institutions. And this is the level of the political economy, the interaction between institutions and markets. The third level, which is where we tend to focus, skipping the first 2 levels, is the macroeconomy. And there you're talking about inflation, which is monetary policy. You're talking about taxation, which is fiscal policy and debt management and things like that. And the 4th level is the level of human development. That is to say, the basics of life. You know, longevity. Do people have good health care? Do they have education? The basics of life, you know. We tend to focus a lot on the macroeconomy, and we ignore human development. And so you find poverty increasing while we're very concerned with GDP growth rates. But we're not concerned with GDP per capita. which has flatlined and remained the same for more than 20 to 30 years now, at about $2,000, which is just unbelievable. So, to fix the Nigerian economy, we must go back to the fundamentals. The Nigerian nation needs to be reinvented. There is no nation. We have a country, but we don't have a nation. We need to create an inclusive philosophical foundation that we can all agree on. That this is what it means to be a Nigerian. This is what we believe in. This is where we're going. And we agreed on who we are in this construct called Nigeria, what our rights are and what our obligations are. That conversation is not happening. Every government in this country avoids the matter of a fundamental constitutional restructuring of Nigeria. And you find that we're operating on a constitution that many people feel left out of. So, therefore, this shapes the politics, because the politics is not a politics of a united vision. It's a politics of contending disparate forces, ethnic, religious, and each person that grabs power represents part of the whole, but not the whole. And what then happens is that he or she, well, he so far, they acquire all the advantages of power, their cronies become rich and get all the appointments. And when their term is over, another people will come and do exactly the same thing. So it's just a case of do me, I do you, God no go vex.
Well, that's an astonishingly brilliant analysis. And I'm going to come to, because the bits, the way you sort of went through the different stages,
yeah.
I want to talk a little bit later on about that, the philosophy and so on.
Absolutely.
But let's deal with that bit that you said that Nigerian governments tend to concentrate on, which is the macroeconomic bit.
Yeah.
What's your best advice about how we can stop the Naira from continuing its dramatic and alarming daily nosedive? The CBN's failure to clear the dollar backlog has put businesses in a very tight FX position and has put extreme pressure on the Naira, which appears to be well on the way to 2,000 Naira to the dollar.
Yes, the way to fix the Naira's problems is a combination of things. Some of them are short-term, but let me start with the long-term, because we've been trying to fix the problem of the Naira for a long, long time. It's just been getting worse. The only way you can fix the Naira is the Nigerian economy needs to become a productive, export-driven economy. I can't say this enough, and I'm not the only one who's saying it, but up till today, we have not seen a comprehensive plan with targets to achieve this. And even when plans are made, they are not always as informed as they should.
But I don't know if you heard President Tinubu.
Yes, I heard him.
Talking about clearing the backlog and doing all of that.
Yes, you see, it's important to clear those backlogs because one of the problems, or a major problem that is affecting the Naira is confidence. And, like you noted, I advise a lot of global investors on Africa's economies, including Nigeria's. And they ask me all these questions, as a way of informing their investment decisions. You have the problem of the backlogs. That's an immediate practical problem. But you also have other problems like massive inflation. Investors do not like to go into an inflationary economy. You have a very high level of debt distress. Investors don't like going into those kinds of economies. Then you have issues of political risk and political stability. Many people feel that Nigeria today is a little bit uneasy, and this is the outcome of the 2023. So what should be done? One of the practical steps that need to be taken is that we need to raise interest rates. I did not lean towards this view, but recent events have convinced me that we have to. Because one of the reasons is that the only way you can encourage immediate inflows that will stabilize the Naira is not even so much foreign investment, it's foreign portfolio investment, which is investments in the open market operations, treasury bills, stocks, the stock exchange. For them to do that, they need to see that the gap between the monetary policy rate, which is the price of lending that the central bank sets, which today is at about 19%, 18.75, and the inflation rate, which is almost at 27%. That gap must narrow. You must close that gap. Otherwise, investors feel that it's not a very sound investment to make in terms of the yield on their investment. So these are some of the issues. The government needs to sell some assets to raise $10 to $20 billion immediately. And when they do these things, it's not to spend it all in 1 year. And then after that, again, you have no solution. It is to come back to what I said. Where is the constitutional restructuring agenda? Where is the fundamental economic diversification agenda in which our products become value added and export? Can that be achieved in the next 3 years? It's possible. It's not easy. I don't claim it's easy, but it's possible. So we need to be thinking at a very deep level. Is the central bank independent? Many investors will always look at that. When I was deputy governor of the central bank, investors in Nigeria had no doubt in their mind that Sanusi and his team of 4 deputy governors, including myself, we called the shots. As far as monetary policy was concerned, as far as forex policy was concerned, the elements that were the mandate of the bank, nobody was in any doubt as to whether we were being teleguided by the political class or today you see, media people around the president, I have to be blunt, issuing statements like the president has directed the central bank. If I was an investor with my money, why would I go there? And this is because of our political culture, where our political leaders have to be made to look all powerful. And it shows a lack of appreciation for the importance of independent institutions, which is the secret of the wealth of nations across the world.
That's a very good point. And let me throw something that you might construe as a wobbler your way. But one of them is the fact that we just heard recently at the National Assembly, billions of naira just about to be spent on buying Prado Jeeps. For the people who are there. I mean, would it be along the lines of what you're saying to strengthen the Nigerian economy if, for example, Nigeria is producing cars.
Exactly.
If rather than helping the Japanese economy.
Why don't you order it from Innocent?
Absolutely. I was going to ask your opinion of that.
Absolutely. And I've said it somewhere else. And of course, I got a lot of calls from friends in the National Assembly. Well, it's not quite like that. But we must tell ourselves the truth. It's not personal. It's about our country. If you're going to borrow 1.5 billion from the World Bank simply to pay palliatives or to pay salaries, again, which does not make much economic sense to me, when you can generate far more than that inside this country, if we are serious and innovative and disciplined, and you have politicians spending at this level. These are all, first of all, they are recurrent expenditure, which is part of why we have high inflation. If you look at our budget, it's for many years, it's been mostly 60 to 70% recurrent expenditures, not capital expenditures. How can an economy like this grow?
And you're basically helping the Japanese economy,
of course,
not the Nigerian
creating
economy.
Jobs in Japan instead of creating jobs in Nigeria. So if our political leaders do not understand this, how do you think we can make progress?
That's a very good point. You are, of course, known as someone who believes in going beyond economics to address Nigeria's development problems. You've touched on it now, so let's get a little bit more into it. How far does the failure of governance influence Nigeria's economy? And does the current Nigerian experience validate those arguments? And I suppose we would say yes, because we're talking about just one example now.
Yes, exactly. The failure of governance in Nigeria, you see, managing the macroeconomy is part of governance. So if you are not running governance fundamentally the way it ought to, which is with accountability, with transparency, with effectiveness that should be measured and evaluated, and accountability must flow from that, then you're not going to apply the principles that are needed to the macroeconomy. In fact, because politics drives everything, selfish politics, crony politics, you find that politicians do a lot of things that run counter to the expressed ambition we hear on speeches on television from them about growing the national economy. So this is the problem. If you have, if you needed any example of this, you don't need to look any further than the Central Bank of Nigeria. The collapse of that institution over the last 10 years is 50% of why Nigeria is in the mess it is today. Just one institution, but a very, very critical one. And so as it began to collapse, as it descended into sycophancy, corruption, and all kinds of things, the economy went down with it. So this is why when we talk about the need for strong institutions, it's not a theory, it's practical. By the way, speaking about theories and practical, we have a problem in this country. We hate theory. We hate concepts. We call it grammar. He's blowing grammar. But go to every country.
Well, you certainly do blow grammar, don't you?
And I have no apologies. I have no apologies because I'm a thinking person. My former boss, Sanusi, said, when incompetence hits you with a passion, you should wear it with pride on your
I like
sleeve.
that. Well, actually, I have to say, I like your blowing of grammar.
Well, thank you.
So let me actually come to this, because I need to get to it.
Absolutely.
In one of your books, which I've had the privilege of skimming through, Emerging Africa,
Yes.
you draw on philosophy, among other things, to offer a new vision of African transformation. And you try to demonstrate how Africa's progress will require the reinvention of the African mindset, and I dare to say the Nigerian mindset. Take us through the points you're making there.
That's the foundation. You remember that when I talked about...
Yes, at the outset.
At the outset, the 4 levels at which... You see, without philosophy, without concepts, people say, don't waste time on the theory. Let's go to the practical. But every successful country, whatever you see in practice that is successful, is based on a sound concept. If the concept is sound, then the practical cannot work. So that's that. Going back to the philosophy, if you look at the Western world, if you look at China, you will see why they have actually become prosperous and powerful nations. Each, whether the West or the East, has been based on a philosophical foundation. In the West, what is that philosophical foundation? They believe in human individual freedoms. They believe in rational scientific exploration and invention. They believe in human rights. They believe in institutions. This is how the Western prosperity sphere was created over the past 400 to 500 years. In the East, and this is what is called a world
And the East
view.
being China.
The East being China and most of Asia. They have
the Oriental world.
Yes, the Oriental world. They have a different philosophical foundation, but it's no less valid. They believe that time is endless and cyclical. They believe that order and the society, are the number one thing. And therefore, they believe that the society is more important than the individual.
So the individual is subsumed within
the individual is
society.
subsumed within the Oriental philosophical construct. So, but each of these worldviews, as I call it, which is an explanation of reality and how to conquer it and how to make progress inside reality, each of them, when it is consistently applied in society, in governance, in managing the economy, always yields success. So if you don't like philosophy, I am sorry for you and your practicality, because you're going to remain a poor country.
So the problem we have, basically, is that we don't have a philosophical vision for our country.
No, we don't. Let me explain this. First of all, Nigeria, we used to have something closer to that in the First Republic, when we had politicians that were far more intellectually leaning than what we have today. Now, at that time, there were philosophers who were political leaders, whether it was Zik, the ultimate philosopher, whether it was Awolowo, a great philosopher, whether it was Ahmadu Bello. Again, we had thinking people who were political leaders. Now, you see, when you want to manage an economy, everybody and their uncle in the world today want to be capitalist, because capitalism defeated communism empirically, right? So everybody has gone capitalist. But if you are philosophically inclined, you will understand that capitalism is a philosophy itself.
Yeah, it is.
And it requires certain prerequisites for it to be successful, to create wealth. So you have everybody in Africa running around as capitalists, but very few people have wealth. But in the West and in Asia, you see the wealth of nations. What are these things that you must have to be successful as a capitalist economy? Number one, property rights. In Nigeria today, do we have property rights? We have the Land Use Act. You don't own your land. You're only on a lease from the government, C of O. That's number one reason why people are poor in this country. You see, I'm sorry to come down to this level, but that's fundamental. Because if you release that hold and people own their land in perpetuity or in freehold, what they can do with it is so much more. They can borrow with it, they can, all kinds of things.
Briefly, because we're almost out of time.
Exactly. So the next thing is that innovation is a very important requirement for capitalism. That it's called creative destruction. New things are created, they control the market, old things may die. The third thing is access to capital. But in Nigeria, capital is so expensive and we don't have a good taxation system. The poor cannot borrow from banks and therefore they cannot create their own wealth.
That is a fascinating analysis. Prof, I want to thank you very much indeed, but please come back and talk to us when we have a little more time. Certainly. Really, inspiring listening to you there. Professor Kingsley Moghalu is a former Deputy Governor of Nigeria's Central Bank. He's currently CEO of Sagato Strategies LLC, a Washington-based macroeconomic and geopolitical risk consultancy that advises global investors. He's also president of the Institute for Governance and Economic Transformation, which is a public policy think tank. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me, John.